Hello and welcome. Find a quiet place, dim the lights, and let your mind drift back in time. Close your eyes and imagine a world lit only by firelight. A place where the soft glow of candles flickers against ancient stone walls, and the faint scent of wood smoke and dried herbs hangs in the cool night air. This is the medieval world, a time of kings and peasants, of monks and merchants, a world built upon strange customs and even stranger rules. To us, many of these rules seem absurd. Why couldn't a baker sell bread after sunset? Why was it forbidden for a farmer to wear certain colors? Why did people bathe so rarely, and why was that even considered wise? But in the Middle Ages, every rule had a reason, and often a very good one. Behind each odd custom lay a fear, a belief, or a piece of hard-earned wisdom carved by centuries of survival. So tonight, we'll wander through cobbled streets and candlelit halls, through cold stone monasteries and noisy village fairs. We'll move slowly, gently, through a time when every hour of the day and every act of life was governed by rules few dared to break. Settle in. The air feels cool and damp, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell is tolling the evening hour. Welcome to the Middle Ages. In every medieval town, life was ruled, quite literally, by bells. They rang at dawn to wake the bakers, at noon to call the workers to their midday meal and rest, and again, at dusk, to signal the curfew. The word curfew itself comes from the old French phrase couvre-feu, which means cover your fire. When that evening bell rang, every household was required by law to cover or extinguish its hearth. To our modern minds, that sounds harsh, almost oppressive. Why not let people keep their fires burning for warmth and light? But in an age when homes were made of wood, straw, and thatch, the reason was deeply practical. Fire was a relentless and terrifying force. One careless spark, one untended ember, could consume an entire village before anyone could possibly stop it. The threat was constant and very real. So, every night, the townsfolk dutifully covered their fires, checked their candles, and settled down for the night beneath heavy wool blankets. The streets fell into a deep quiet. The night belonged only to the town watchmen, making their rounds with lanterns, to the stray dogs scavenging in the alleys, and to the faint, echoing sound of bells from distant churches. If you listen closely, you might almost hear that slow, hollow chime drifting through the dark. A powerful reminder that even in the heart of the Middle Ages, safety and community depended on everyone's obedience to simple, sensible rules. Now, let's turn our attention to the heart of the medieval town, the marketplace. In medieval England, bread wasn't just food, it was life itself. It formed the foundation of every single meal, nourishing everyone from kings in their castles to the poorest peasants in the fields. But this vital staple could also bring ruin upon those who made it. From the 13th century onward, a powerful law called the Assize of Bread and Ale dictated the exact weight and price of every loaf sold. Every baker was legally required to follow it to the letter. If they were caught cheating, even slightly, the punishment was swift and severe. If your loaf was found to be too light or your bread sold for a fraction too much, you could be publicly shamed, forced to pay a hefty fine, or even locked in the stocks for all to see and ridicule. This wasn't just about ensuring honesty. It was about survival. In a world where famine was a constant looming threat, selling a short loaf was seen as stealing food directly from the mouths of the hungry. So, to protect themselves, bakers learned to add a little extra. It became common practice to sell 13 loaves for the price of 12, giving one away for free just to be absolutely sure they never fell short of the law's strict requirements. And that's where the famous phrase, "a baker's dozen," was born. In every marketplace you could hear the rustle of flour sacks, clatter of brass scales, and the quiet murmur of merchants carefully checking their weights. The bread laws might seem strange to us now, but they were a crucial mechanism for keeping the peace between the rich and poor, ensuring that no one went hungry simply because of another's greed. Now, imagine yourself walking through that same medieval town. Look at the people around you. In the Middle Ages, what you wore was not just a matter of personal choice or fashion. It was the law. Sumptuary laws, as they were called, told people exactly what materials and colors they were permitted to wear, based entirely on their social class. Peasants and laborers were forbidden from wearing expensive fabrics like silk or fine linen. Certain vibrant colors, like deep crimson or a rich royal blue, were reserved exclusively for nobles and royalty. Even the details mattered. The width of your sleeves, the length of your cloak, or the type of fur trimming you used could instantly mark your status in society. Breaking these rules wasn't just a fashion faux pas. It could lead to heavy fines or even the confiscation of the offending garments. It sounds cruel and unfair to us, but the logic behind these laws was tied to the very structure of medieval life. Order. In a rigidly stratified world where everyone had a specific place, clothing was a visual map of society. It allowed anyone to immediately understand who held power, who served, and who belonged where. These laws reinforced the social hierarchy and prevented what they saw as the chaos of social climbing. While it stifled personal expression, it was another way the medieval world used rules to maintain a fragile, but necessary, sense of stability. But what about the rules that governed the body itself? We've all heard the jokes about how people in the Middle Ages rarely bathed. And while it's true they didn't hop in a daily shower, their relationship with cleanliness was far more complex than we assume. Public bathhouses were actually quite common in the early medieval period, serving as social hubs much like Roman baths. People would gather to bathe, chat, and even conduct business. However, as the centuries wore on, attitudes began to change. The church grew wary of the bathhouses, viewing them as places of vice and immorality. More importantly, medical theories of the time began to warn against bathing. Doctors, following ancient Greek ideas, believed that the body was governed by humors. They thought that immersing the body in hot water would open up the pores, making it vulnerable to bad air and disease. The devastating arrival of the Black Death in the 14th century seemed to confirm these fears. People believed the plague could enter the body through the skin, so they sealed themselves off, avoiding water as a matter of self-preservation. So cleanliness shifted from full-body bathing to more targeted washing. People would regularly wash their hands and face. They used scented waters and carried pouches of fragrant herbs called pomanders to ward off bad smells and, they hoped, disease. Linen undergarments, which were washed frequently, also helped keep the body clean by absorbing sweat and oils. It wasn't a lack of desire to be clean, but a different understanding of health and the body, shaped by fear and the best medical knowledge they had at the time. Their world was filled with invisible threats, and their customs were their shield. From the fire in the hearth to the clothes on their back, every aspect of medieval life was woven into a complex tapestry of rules, traditions, and beliefs. Each law, no matter how strange it seems to us, was a thread in that tapestry, holding their world together. It was a world of profound faith, deep-seated fears, and an unshakable belief in order. By understanding their rules, we don't just see a list of bizarre customs. We get a glimpse into the medieval mind itself. We see a people navigating a world that was often harsh and unforgiving, using the tools of law and tradition to create safety, meaning, and a sense of place. Thank you for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories from history. We'd love to have you with us. Until next time. Did you know that in medieval times, the clothes you wore could land you in serious trouble? It sounds bizarre, right? But back then, governments had something called sumptuary laws. These were rules about what you could and couldn't wear, all based on your social class. A farmer wasn't allowed to wear the same fancy fabrics as a nobleman, and a merchant's wife couldn't sport the same jewels as a duchess. The idea was to keep society in order, to make sure everyone knew their place just by looking at them. It kept people from pretending to be someone they weren't. But you know, human nature rules are often made to be bent. These laws had some curious side effects. In some towns, clever young people found ways to sneak around the rules. Imagine this. A young woman might wear hidden trims of luxurious velvet just inside her collar. Or a young man might have small, decorative rings secretly sewn into the cuffs of his tunic. It was a subtle act of defiance, a personal statement. Fashion, it seems, has always been a rebel, finding creative ways to slip past authority. And of course, not everywhere was under the constant watch of the law. Think of the candlelit taverns, filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of ale. In those cozy, dimly lit spaces, social rules started to blur. No one really cared if a man's belt was a bit too fine for his station, or if his tunic was a little too long. When the world outside was governed by strict, unbending order, the night became a sanctuary for quiet, personal rebellion. It was a place where you could be a little more yourself. Let's talk about something that might seem even stranger to us modern folks: bathing. To the medieval mind, taking too many baths was considered dangerous, and in some circles, even sinful. It wasn't that they didn't have the option. Public bathhouses were actually quite popular for a time. People would gather to soak in large tubs of warm, herb-scented water. It was a social activity, a place to relax, chat with friends, and wash away the grime of daily life. Sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? But over time, the church began to cast a wary eye on these practices. Bathing became associated with vanity, idleness, and temptation. The communal, often mixed-gender nature of bathhouses was seen as a source of moral corruption. Then, the Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, and fear changed everything. Medical understanding at the time was, shall we say, a bit different. Doctors developed a theory that hot water was dangerous because it opened up the pores of the skin. They believed this created an entryway for miasmas, or bad, disease-filled air, to enter the body and cause illness. So, the logical conclusion, in their view, was to avoid bathing too often. It was better to stay fully clothed, stay warm, and keep the body's natural humors in balance. Instead of water, people relied on dry washing. They would vigorously rub their skin with clean linen cloths, or use mixtures of herbs and vinegar to freshen up. A huge emphasis was placed on clean undergarments. They believed that changing your linen shirt frequently could draw impurities out of the body and keep you clean. It sounds incredibly unpleasant to our 21st century sensibilities, but for them, it was a practical strategy for staying healthy. Every rule, no matter how strange it seems to us now, usually stemmed from a genuine desire to survive and make sense of their world. But not all medieval rules were about what you could wear or how you should wash. Some of the most powerful rules were about what you couldn't say asterisk. Specifically, they were about silence. Across Europe, in monasteries tucked away in the countryside or perched on remote hillsides, monks and nuns lived under strict codes of conduct. One of the most influential was the rule of Saint Benedict, which organized every moment of the day around prayer, work, and quiet contemplation. This rule required long, profound periods of silence. A monk's day was a symphony of quiet ritual. They would rise before dawn for the first prayers, eat their meals in complete silence, and work quietly throughout the day, whether in the fields, the kitchens, or the scriptoria, the rooms where manuscripts were copied. Imagine sitting down for a meal in a grand hall with dozens of other people, but the only sound is the gentle clinking of utensils and the rustle of robes. Even during meals, no one spoke a word. Instead, one monk would stand at a lectern and read aloud from the Bible or other sacred texts. The idea was to nourish the soul at the same time as the body. To us, this might sound incredibly lonely or even cruel, but for the monks, silence wasn't an absence of something. It wasn't emptiness. It was a presence. It was peace. It was the space they needed to feel closer to God, to listen for that still, small voice. In that profound quiet, they could hear the world in a different way, the creak of the wooden pews, the whisper of the wind, the rhythmic scratch of a quill on parchment. In that stillness, they found a deep sense of order, purpose, and meaning. And this devotion to silence had an incredible lasting impact on the world. It was in the quiet focus of the scriptoria that monks painstakingly copied and preserved the knowledge of the ancient world. Classical literature, philosophy, science, so much of it survived the so-called Dark Ages because of their patient, silent work. Beyond the monastery walls, the rhythm of life for ordinary people was also dictated by a set of rules, not written in law books, but woven into the fabric of time itself. In medieval Europe, time belonged to the church. The entire year was structured around a sacred calendar. The lives of everyday people, farmers, artisans, merchants, were marked by this religious rhythm. Their understanding of the year wasn't about dates on a calendar page. It was about sound, ritual, and community. They knew the changing of the seasons, not just by the sun, but by the church bells ringing for different services. Their year was a cycle of fasts and feasts. There were somber periods like Lent, when certain foods were forbidden and life became more austere. And then there were joyous celebrations like Christmas or Easter, when the whole community would come together for feasts, festivals, and special church services. Holy days dedicated to various saints dotted the calendar, each with its own traditions and rituals. An ordinary person might not have been able to read or write, but they knew the stories of their faith intimately through stained glass windows, sermons, and passion plays. They knew the year through its sounds, its smells, and its tastes. This shared rhythm created a powerful sense of collective identity and belonging. It gave structure and meaning to their lives, connecting them to their neighbors, to their ancestors, and to the divine. From the color of your clothes to the silence in your day, medieval life was governed by a web of rules that shaped every aspect of existence. They may seem strange, even nonsensical to us now, but they reveal a world trying to create order, find meaning, and simply survive. Each rule is a window into their hopes, their fears, and their deepest beliefs. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which medieval rule you found the most surprising. See you in the next video. Step back in time, and you'll find a world governed by rules that seem utterly bizarre to us today. A world where bells dictated diets, love was a legal contract, animals stood trial, and the night itself was forbidden territory. But were these just the whims of a superstitious age? Or was there a hidden logic, a secret rhythm that kept medieval society from collapsing? Let's uncover the surprising reasons behind the strangest rules of the Middle Ages. Imagine a town where the sound of a bell could change what everyone ate. That was the reality for centuries. Bells would ring not just for prayer, but to signal the start of Lent or other holy fasts. Suddenly, entire communities would shift their diets. Meat vanished from every table, from the peasant's hut to the king's castle. Butter and lard were replaced with oil, and the smell of fish, often salted and pungent, filled the air. On the surface, this looks like strict religious control, and in many ways it was. The church held immense power over daily life. But there was a deeper, more practical reason for these rules. Fasting was a brilliant survival strategy. These periods of abstinence often coincided with late winter and early spring, the leanest months of the year when stored food was running low and new crops had not yet grown. By collectively restricting their diets, communities stretched their scarce resources, ensuring that everyone had something to eat. It was a shared sacrifice that taught discipline and fostered a sense of unity. Every simple meal became a moment of gratitude, a reminder of the abundance that would return. Even kings had to obey. On fast days, their famously lavish feasts became simpler, humbler affairs. And when the fast finally ended, the joy was universal. Bells would ring with a new energy. Bakeries would fill the air with the scent of fresh bread, and ale would flow freely once more. This cycle of denial and delight wasn't just about faith, it was about survival. In a world without smartphones or digital calendars, these religious rules gave society its rhythm, reminding everyone when to work, when to rest, and when to hope. Now let's talk about love. In the medieval world, falling in love was rarely a private affair. Marriage was a contract, an alliance, and it came with rules as complex as any royal decree. A peasant couldn't simply choose a wife. He needed the permission of the lord of the manor. Why? Because a marriage was a matter of property, labor, and social balance. If two serfs from different estates married without their lord's consent, it could disrupt the workforce. One lord might lose a valuable laborer, upsetting the delicate economic equilibrium of the manor. For the nobility, the stakes were even higher. A marriage could seal a political alliance, merge vast territories, or end a long-standing feud. Permission often had to come from the king himself. The church added its own layers of regulation. For any wedding, the banns of marriage had to be announced in public, usually on 3 consecutive Sundays. This was to ensure no one was trying to marry in secret, was already wed to someone else, or was too closely related, which was a major concern. It sounds incredibly strict, but these rules served as a form of protection. The public announcement prevented men from tricking women into sham marriages and then abandoning them. It made the commitment official and binding in the eyes of the entire community. Behind every peal of wedding bells was a complex web of law, faith, and economics, all designed to hold society together in uncertain times. Perhaps one of the most baffling medieval customs to our modern minds is the trial of animals. Yes, you heard that right. Animals were sometimes arrested, taken to court and tried for their crimes. A pig that attacked a child might be dressed in human clothes and brought before a judge. Witnesses would be called to testify, lawyers would argue the case, and a verdict would be read. The sentence could be as severe as execution by hanging. It seems utterly absurd, a scene straight out of a comedy sketch. But for medieval people, this was a deadly serious matter. They believed in a divinely created moral order where justice applied to all living things, not just humans. By putting an animal on trial, the community was reinforcing that moral order. They were publicly demonstrating that every act, whether committed by a person or a beast, had consequences. It was a way of restoring balance to a world they believed was governed by God's law. There was also a deeply human reason for these bizarre proceedings. Imagine the grief and anger of a family whose child was harmed by an animal. In an age with little understanding of psychology, the trial offered a path to closure. It gave them a tangible target for their anger and a formal process to see justice done, providing a sense of resolution that might otherwise have been impossible to find. Though we might laugh at these cases today, they reveal something profound about the medieval mindset. A belief in a world where every single thread was woven into a single, meaningful tapestry of divine purpose. As twilight fell over a medieval town, a different set of rules came into force. A bell would begin to toll, a deep, slow sound that echoed through the darkening streets. This was the curfew, a word derived from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover your fire. It was a signal for everyone to extinguish their lamps and bank the embers in their hearths for the night. Once the curfew bell fell silent, the hour of the night watch began. Guards carrying lanterns and weapons would patrol the empty, winding streets. Their footsteps on the cobblestones were one of the only sounds in the sleeping city. They checked that doors were locked, listened for signs of trouble, and made sure no one was carrying an open flame. If you were caught wandering the streets after curfew without a very good reason, you could be arrested and fined. The night was a place of immense fear. It wasn't just the threat of criminals that worried people, but also a deep-seated belief in the supernatural. People were convinced that demons, restless spirits, and all manner of dark entities roamed the world after sunset. To be out alone in the dark was to risk not only your life but your very soul. But again, this rule had a critical, practical purpose. Medieval towns, built largely of wood and thatch, were tinderboxes. A single stray spark could lead to a catastrophic fire that could destroy an entire district in hours. The curfew was a vital fire prevention measure. It also helped the watch maintain order, making it harder for thieves and rioters to operate under the cover of darkness. Inside their homes, families would say their prayers and huddle together, listening to the wind howl outside. The medieval world slept under watchful eyes, protected by rules that turned the night from a realm of chaos into one of uneasy, enforced peace. From fasting to forbidden love, and from animal courts to citywide curfews, the strange rules of the Middle Ages were far more than just random superstitions. They were ingenious solutions to the real-world problems of survival, social order, and justice. They were the very framework that held a fragile world together. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories. Let me know in the comments which medieval rule you find the most surprising. See you next time. Have you ever imagined what life was really like in the Middle Ages? It wasn't just castles and quests. It was a world woven together by strange and fascinating rules. Rules that governed everything from what you drank to the weapons you carried. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on these forgotten laws and discovering the hidden logic behind them. Let's start with something you might find surprising. Weapons. We picture knights with their shining swords, but what about everyone else? In the medieval world, weapons were everywhere, yet who could carry them was meticulously controlled. A knight's sword wasn't just for fighting. It was a powerful symbol of status, a sign of his duty and his place in society. But for the common folk, it was a different story. In many towns, a strict rule forbade any man from wearing a sword within the city walls, unless he was on official duty. Imagine walking through a bustling marketplace where blades were deliberately absent. Even a farmer's everyday tools, his axe, a spear for hunting, or a long knife were often banned from public spaces like fairs. Why? It wasn't just about preventing a random brawl. It was about maintaining order and, more importantly, preventing any thought of an uprising. A sword was more than a weapon. It was a mark of privilege, a badge separating the warrior class from everyone else. Of course, rules are made to be broken, or at least bent, especially in times of crisis. When an invasion loomed, the call to arms went out to everyone. Suddenly, peasants who had never held anything more dangerous than a scythe were handed spears and staves. They became the first and last line of defense for their homes and villages. It was in these moments of shared danger that the rigid social lines blurred, but once peace was restored, those same weapons were surrendered, locked away safely until the next threat emerged. This system was a delicate balancing act to maintain control, but it also forged a sense of unity. The laws around weapons were both a barrier and a bond, defining who protected and who obeyed. And these rules weren't just about weapons. They crept into every corner of medieval life, in towns and villages, in fields, and even in churches. Life was a symphony of regulations. From the precise weight of the bread you bought to the time you had to extinguish your fire at night, every action was guided by laws designed to balance the ever-present threat of chaos with the desperate need for calm. To live in the Middle Ages was to understand this rhythm, to obey not just the decrees of kings, but the inherited wisdom of centuries. Every strange rule had a reason, a story written not on parchment, but in shared memory, fear, and faith. Now, let's talk about something we take completely for granted: salt. Today, it's in a shaker on every table. But in the medieval world, salt was, in some places, more valuable than gold. It was the key to survival. It preserved meat through the long, harsh winters, cured fish from the summer's catch, and kept food from rotting when harvests were scarce. Without salt, life itself was incredibly fragile. Because of its immense value, rulers controlled the salt trade with an iron fist. Kings imposed heavy taxes, and powerful guilds regulated every aspect of its sale. In France, this tax became infamous. It was called the gabelle, and it lasted for centuries, causing widespread resentment. Ordinary villagers were forbidden from mining or selling salt on their own. Every single handful had to be purchased from the king's officials at a set price. It sounds incredibly oppressive, doesn't it? But there was a logic behind it, however harsh. Salt meant survival for entire communities. Without these strict controls, the powerful could hoard it, or it could be mishandled and spoiled, leaving whole regions to face starvation during the cold months. So, merchants and peasants alike followed the law. They measured out salt as if it were treasure, treating this simple mineral as a sacred substance that could turn decay into endurance. Even now, if you listen closely to the sound of salted fish frying in a pan, you can almost hear the echo of those ancient rules, a powerful reminder that in a world defined by hardship, preservation was unjust a practical chore. It was a holy act. And what did people drink back then? If you're thinking of a cool, clear glass of water, think again. In the Middle Ages, water was often a death sentence. Rivers and streams were used as open sewers. Wells could easily become contaminated, and invisible diseases spread through the water supply. So what was the alternative? Ale, lightly fermented beer, or ale, was the staple drink for everyone. Even children would sip from their wooden mugs, drinking what was known as small beer. This was a very weak brew, containing just enough alcohol to kill the dangerous germs found in water, making it far safer to drink. It was hydrating, provided some calories, and was a cornerstone of the daily diet. But just because everyone was drinking it didn't mean it was a free-fall. Brewing had its own set of strict laws. Just as a baker's loaf was measured and weighed, the quality of ale was carefully inspected. Every town had an official called the ale taster. His job was to visit every tavern and home brewer to ensure the ale was of the proper strength and purity. He would literally taste the product to pass judgment. If the ale was too weak, the brewer would be fined for shortchanging his customers. But if it was too strong, it could be seen as a form of deceit, tricking people into paying for cheap ale disguised as a more expensive brew. It was all about fairness and public health. These regulations ensured that the drink keeping everyone safe was itself safe and honest. As we look back at this world of curious customs and harsh laws, from swords to salt to ale, we see a society constantly striving for balance. They were navigating a world filled with dangers we can barely imagine today. Every rule, no matter how strange it seems to us, was a tool in an attempt to carve out a little bit of safety, a little peace, and a little light in the darkness. They sought the same things we all do, just in a very different world. The night grows quieter now. The bell tolls again, and somewhere a candle burns low. Sleep, traveler. The echoes of the past are all around us, if we just know how to listen. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. Gosh, if you found these stories as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the hidden corners of history. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever pictured a time when your entire village would line up, waiting for a single person to taste a barrel of ale? It sounds like a scene from a comedy, but for medieval people, this was serious business. That person was the town taster, and their verdict meant everything. It wasn't about being picky, it was about survival. This rule protected everyone, especially the poor, from being sold, spoiled, or watered down ale. In a world where clean water was a luxury, ale was the daily drink that kept people hydrated. This simple rule ensured it was safe, healthy, and kept the community alive. It shows us that even the strangest medieval laws had a powerful logic behind them. For most people in the Middle Ages, the land was their entire world, provided their food, their clothes, and their identity. Yet the vast majority didn't own a single patch of it. Instead, they lived by a remarkable system called the open field system. Imagine a huge patchwork quilt of fields, with each family having the right to farm a few narrow strips here and there. It was a system built on pure trust and a strict set of rules. Nobody could start plowing before the agreed-upon day, and no one could harvest before their neighbors. Fences were forbidden until the last crop was brought in, ensuring everyone's animals could graze on the leftover stalks. If you broke the rules, you faced fines, or worse, being cast out from the only home you'd ever known. To our modern minds, it sounds incredibly restrictive. But this system created a delicate balance. It guaranteed that even the poorest family had a fair chance to grow enough food to make it through the year. It was a social safety net woven from soil and tradition. When the harvest finally arrived, the entire village moved as one organism. The fields would fill with the flash of sickles, the rustling of grain, and the sound of laughter carried on the wind. It was a time of immense collective effort and celebration. When the very last sheaf of wheat was gathered, the local priest would walk the empty fields, blessing the ground and sealing the year's hard labor under the watchful eye of heaven. These rules, which might seem like chains, were actually the threads that bound the community together. They turned a collection of individual families into a single, resilient unit, capable of facing the harsh realities of their world together. Stepping into the world of medieval medicine was a risky affair. Being a healer was a dangerous profession, walking a tightrope between reverence and suspicion. Doctors were a luxury few could afford, potent herbs were precious, and illness often carried the stain of sin. A healer who successfully cured a fever could be celebrated as a hero one day, only to be accused of witchcraft the next if a patient took a turn for the worse. To navigate this perilous landscape, a strict set of rules, some written down, others just silently understood, unmerged. These rules were designed to draw a clear line between acceptable healing practices and forbidden magic. Women, in particular, were watched with intense scrutiny. A midwife, for example, was a respected and essential part of the community. She could legally deliver babies and assist mothers through childbirth. However, if she used charms, recited prayers not sanctioned by the church, or was found with unusual herbs, suspicion would quickly fall upon her. Similarly, a village herbalist could mix potions to treat a cough or reduce a fever, but creating a potion for love, for luck, or to curse an enemy? That was crossing a line into dangerous, forbidden territory. To us today, the distinction between medicine and magic might seem blurry and arbitrary. But in their world, it was the crucial line that separated community safety from what they perceived as demonic influence and social chaos. These rules weren't just born from fear, though fear was certainly a part of it. People were terrified of what they couldn't understand, and a failed cure could easily be blamed on dark forces. But beneath that fear, the rules served a practical purpose. They protected communities from charlatans and dangerous, untested experiments. They created a framework of accepted knowledge, preventing the spread of harmful superstitions when treatments inevitably failed. Behind every folk remedy and every whispered prayer was the same universal human desire we feel today: the desperate wish to ease pain, to heal the sick, and to hold on to life for just a little longer. Long before digital clocks and smartphones, time was measured by the gentle flickering flame of a candle. It was the original nightlight, telling the passing hours not with a chime, but with a slow, steady burn. In monasteries, this was a precise science. Candles were meticulously crafted, each one designed to burn for a specific length of time: an hour, 3 hours, a whole night. Strict rules dictated when they could be lit, how many could burn at once, and who was allowed to use them. Lighting too many was a sign of wasteful extravagance. Too few, and the monks couldn't perform their sacred duties of reading and praying through the night. The candle was their clock, their guide, and their connection to the divine in the darkness. This reverence for light extended into ordinary households. In many towns, only the wealthy could afford the luxury of beeswax candles, which burned cleanly with a sweet, honeyed scent. The poor had to make do with tallow candles, rendered from animal fat. These were smoky, sputtered, and filled the small, crowded homes with a foul odor. Yet every single flame mattered. During the brutal cold of winter, a candle's small pool of light and warmth was a beacon of safety. Its soft crackle marked the sacred boundary between the labors of the day and the rest of the night. To waste light was to disrespect the hard work it took to earn it and the natural resources that created it. So, they rationed it with immense care, like a precious supply of water in a desert. In the quiet hush of a medieval home, the soft hiss of a candle being snuffed out was the final act of the day, signaling that another period of life had passed, governed by both rule and reason. Every rule, no matter how small or strange it seems to us from the town taster, as judgment of ale to the careful rationing of a single candle, carried a profound lesson. It wasn't just about control for control's sake. It was about creating balance in a world that was incredibly fragile. Life in the Middle Ages was precarious. One bad harvest, one sweeping illness, or one stray spark from a fire could wipe out an entire village. In the face of such constant uncertainty, people clung to order. They built a strange and wise system of rules, passed down through centuries of shared memory and hard-won experience. And when you look closely, you start to see that their rules aren't so alien after all. They were fundamentally about the same things we strive for today: community safety, fairness for all, preservation of resources, and a deep-seated faith that there was a right way to live. They were about finding a way to survive and even thrive in a world that often felt like it was teetering on the edge of chaos. Their world may be gone, but the wisdom of their rules still echoes. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the hidden logic of the Middle Ages, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. See you next time. Sound of a distant, soft church bell. The church bell rings, a faint whisper against a dimming sky. Night is coming, and with it, the rules return ancient, unspoken, yet echoing across time. Welcome back to our channel, where today we re-journeying into the medieval world, a place where logic and belief lived side by side. Sometimes in peace, sometimes trembling together in fear. To serve in this era meant understanding not just nature, but the invisible powers believed to dwell within it. There were rules for everything unseen, little rituals woven into the fabric of daily life. For instance, you would never sweep the floor after sunset, for fear of chasing away good spirits and welcoming misfortune. You'd never leave your shoes upside down, as it was thought to invite demons into the home. And you would certainly never whistle indoors, a seemingly innocent act that could summon the wind, or worse, the devil himself. To us, these sound like quaint superstitions. But in their world, these habits served a quiet, vital purpose: to create a sense of order in a world filled with unknowns. When the plague struck, or the crops failed, people desperately needed explanations, a way to make sense of their suffering. These rules and rituals gave them comfort, a feeling that danger could be managed, even if just through small symbolic actions. Hanging herbs above the door, sprinkling holy water in the barn, or crossing yourself at the sound of thunder, these were small acts of hope, disguised as rules. And in a world shrouded in uncertainty, Sometimes hope was all you needed to survive another night. Death was a constant presence in the Middle Ages. Yet even death followed its own sacred order. You couldn't just bury your loved ones wherever you pleased. There were laws even in grief. A body had to be blessed by a priest before burial and placed in the grave facing east, towards the rising sun, the ultimate symbol of resurrection. Graves were dug only in consecrated ground, usually near a church where the tolling of a bell would mark the soul as passing from this world to the next. But behind the solemn beauty of these customs lay a very real practical fear: disease. Improper burial could spread sickness like wildfire, especially in crowded towns. So, the rules were strict. Graves had to be dug deep enough. Lime was often used to purify the soil, and bodies were sealed in coffins or tightly wrapped. Even the tolling of the bell had a dual function. It was a prayer for the dead, but also a warning to the living to stay away, to give space and silence to the passing. As night fell, flickering candles were set beside the body, not only to keep away malevolent spirits, but also to deter wild animals. For the living, it was a delicate dance between faith and hygiene. For the dying, it was a promise of peace. For many, the open road was a path of both danger and devotion. Pilgrimage was one of the great medieval callings, epic journeys made to holy shrines across Europe. From Canterbury to Santiago de Compostela, from Rome to Jerusalem. But not just anyone could wander freely. A complex system of rules governed these travelers, a kind of spiritual passport system. Before leaving home, a pilgrim had to receive a blessing from their local priest. They often wore a special token, like a scallop shell or a wooden cross, to prove their sacred purpose. They were also required to travel barefoot or in humble clothing, a sign of piety that also, conveniently, made them less of a target for thieves. Along the way, monasteries and inns were obliged to offer them food and shelter, but usually for only one night. This prevented freeloading and ensured that travelers kept moving steadily onward toward their destination. These customs might seem strict, but they transformed the chaos of the road into a network of compassion. They allowed millions of strangers to walk the same paths in relative safety, guided by faith, law, and a shared dream of forgiveness. In a world ruled by faith, even sin had structure. Every act, thought, and word was measured against invisible scales, and the church had the ultimate say. Detailed guides called penitentials were created, which were essentially lists of sins and their corresponding punishments. If you stole a loaf of bread, you might have to fast for 3 days. If you told a lie, you might be assigned a certain number of prayers. For greater wrongs, the penance was more severe: long pilgrimage or wearing plain rough clothes for a year. It sounds harsh, but the goal wasn't just cruelty. It was about restoring balance, turning guilt into action, and transforming wrongdoing into reflection. Even priests had to follow strict rules when hearing confession. They could never, ever speak of what they heard. Breaking that sacred vow was one of the gravest sins of all. So, in a small wooden booth, illuminated by a single candle, secrets passed like shadows from a troubled soul to a listening ear, from fear to the promise of forgiveness. In its own way, it was the medieval version of therapy, guided not by science, but by a rhythm of faith and ritual. Punishment in the Middle Ages could be brutal, but even here, a strange logic often hid beneath the horror. The stocks, the pillory, the scaffold all were designed with a clear purpose: to shame, to deter, and to teach. Because permanent prisons were rare and expensive, justice had to be swift, public, and memorable. If you were a thief, you might lose a hand. If you lied in court, your tongue could be branded. Yet these punishments weren't entirely random acts of cruelty. They were carefully codified. Every town had its assizes, where judges traveled from place to place, bringing the king's law to the local people. The idea was simple: let everyone see justice done, so they would remember to live rightly. Crowds gathered in the public square, not for entertainment, for assurance. That order still existed. That wrongdoing had consequences, and that safety still meant something. And when the gallows were empty, and peace returned to the square, life went on, governed by a quiet, delicate balance of fear and fairness. Knowledge was power, and in the medieval world, power was often seen as dangerous. Books were incredibly rare, painstakingly copied by hand, and guarded jealously in monasteries. The church held a tight grip on what could be studied, copied, or taught. Alchemy, astrology, and certain classical philosophies were often forbidden. Yet these forbidden subjects thrived in whispers, discussed in candlelit rooms behind heavy locked doors. The reason for this control wasn't just ignorance. It was a deep-seated fear that knowledge without spiritual guidance might unravel faith or tempt people into the sin of pride. But human curiosity is a powerful force. Scholars found ways to bend the rules. They hid controversial notes in the margins of approved texts, disguised scientific experiments as acts of prayer, and spoke in coded language about the stars, the human body, and the nature of the soul. It was through this constant tension between the rigid rules and relentless curiosity that modern science was quietly born. From within the very heart of these restrictions, discovery emerged, bit by bit, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the intricate patterns of a stained glass window. The medieval world, for all its rules, couldn't contain the human spirit's desire to understand. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found these hidden rules of the past as fascinating as we do, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one. We often imagine the medieval world as a dark and fearful place, where knowledge was suppressed and life was brutal. But what if that's only half the story? What if the very rules that seem so strange, so cruel to us now, were actually a shield against chaos? What if every law, every ritual, every superstition was a way to keep a fragile world from breaking apart? Let's journey back in time, not to the grand battles or royal courts, but to the quiet rhythms of everyday life. To a world governed by the rule of fire, of bread, of silence, and of sin. Each of these rules helped maintain a delicate balance in a world that was always on the brink. In the flickering light of a candle, people saw the passage of time. In the familiar words of a prayer, they found order. And in their rules, they found a strange kind of safety, a rhythm that turned deep-seated fear into a sense of meaning. Listen, the bells are tolling. A cool wind drifts through the narrow lanes, and the smoke from a hearth curls toward the rafters. The day fades, as all days must, under the quiet wisdom of old laws. This is the story of how the medieval world held itself together. In the Middle Ages, stories were more than just entertainment. They were education, history, and moral law all rolled into one. Every village had its storyteller, a minstrel or troubadour, who traveled from hall to hall with a harp and a head full of tales. They sang of brave knights, foolish kings, and clever peasants. But beneath every exciting adventure lay a hidden rule, a whisper of how one ought to live. In these stories, the greedy were always punished, the kind were rewarded, and those who broke divine law inevitably met with a poetic and often grim justice. Through fables, children learned what no law book could ever teach them, that character mattered, that humility had worth, and that mercy was a form of strength. The rhythm of the story became the rhythm of morality itself. Even in the quiet solitude of monasteries, this tradition lived on. Monks would copy these tales by candlelight, sometimes adding little notes in the margins, gentle reminders to themselves and future readers to live rightly. And so, even the smallest village in Europe was bound not only by royal decrees or church commands, but by the quiet, consistent rules woven into its stories. Hospitality wasn't just a virtue in the medieval world, it was sacred. If a stranger knocked on your door in the dead of night, you were obliged by law and custom to feed and shelter them. To turn away a traveler was considered a sin, and to harm a guest under your own roof was to invite a curse upon your house. This wasn't just about kindness. Roads were treacherous, and inns were few and far between. Survival often depended on the charity of strangers. Many families kept what was known as a guest loaf, a small, specially blessed round of bread set aside just for visitors. It symbolized the belief that any traveler could be a messenger, or perhaps even a saint in disguise. Of course, there were rules. Guests could stay no longer than 3 nights unless they were sick or lost. And in return for shelter, they were expected to pray for their hosts. At night, as the fire burned low, the guest would sleep by the hearth close to the warmth, also close to the exit, ready to continue their journey at dawn. It was a system built not on money, but on a fragile, mutual faith, a beautiful trust that connected everyone wandering under the same medieval sky. War was a constant looming shadow in medieval life. Yet, even in the midst of endless bloodshed, there were rules. The Church, alarmed by the violence, introduced something remarkable: the Truce of God. This was a spiritual law that forbade any fighting on holy days, during Lent, and on Sundays. Any knight who dared to break this truce faced excommunication, a punishment more terrifying to them than death itself. At first, not many obeyed. But slowly over time, the idea began to take root. It wasn't seen as a form of control, but as an act of mercy. The Truce of God created small islands of peace in a violent age. It gave farmers a chance to harvest their crops, traders a safe window to travel, and families a day to pray without the fear of an attack. The rule was imperfect, and often ignored. But it marked the first fragile attempt to limit war through the power of conscience. It was the beginning of an idea that would echo through centuries, that even the most immense power must sometimes bow to compassion. Medieval people lived their lives surrounded by craftsmanship. Every tool they used, every wall they built, every piece of clothing they wore was made by hand and guided by ancient rules. A stonemason, before carving a column for a great cathedral, had to study secret proportions laid out in guild scrolls passed down through generations. A weaver couldn't use certain colors without permission, because expensive dyes were strictly regulated. Even bakers had to follow rules for the size and weight of their loaves if they were too small. They faced fines or public shaming in the town square. These laws might seem tedious to us, but they were the bedrock of a society built on trust. People knew the value of what they bought, what they traded, and what they prayed beside. Each rule linked one worker to another, ensuring that beauty and honesty went hand in hand. And from those guilds came a timeless idea that true mastery isn't about freedom from rules, but about finding harmony within them. Died. Inside the stone walls of monasteries, a different kind of rule shaped daily life: the rule of silence. Monks and nuns believed that constant speech distracted the soul and weakened its connection to the divine. So, for entire days, not a single word would be spoken, except during prayer. They developed a system of gestures to communicate their simple netza: tap on the table for bread, a wave of the hand for water. At first, the quiet must have felt heavy, even oppressive, but over time, the silence itself became a kind of music. The soft rhythm of footsteps on stone floors, the gentle turning of parchment pages, the murmur of wind through the corridors. It was believed that in silence, one could hear God more clearly. But beyond religion, this rule offered something we still long for today: peace. A rare and profound calm in a world filled with chaos and noise. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes restraint isn't repression. It's a path to balance. It's how we find rest. When darkness fell, the medieval world obeyed the bell. Nearly every town had a curfew. From the French couvre-feu, which literally means cover fire. When the evening bell rang, every household had to extinguish its flames or cover them with a clay lid. The reason was practical. It was a simple, effective way to prevent fires from spreading through the tightly packed wooden streets. But the curfew bell also carried a deeper rhythm. It was a nightly pause, a universal signal that the day's labor was done, and it was time to surrender to the night. People locked their doors, said their prayers by dim candlelight, and listened to the muffled sound of the night watch patrolling the cobblestones. Night was a time for stillness, not for movement. It was the law, but it was also a lullaby, fastidious, gentle way of telling its people that it was time to rest. In an age before printed books were common, memory wasn't just a skill, it was a discipline. And there were rules for remembering. Scholars were trained to recall entire texts by memorizing the shape and rhythm of their verses. Merchants kept track of debts by associating them with specific objects in their minds. And peasants remembered the cycle of the seasons through simple rhymes that linked the weather to different saints' days. To forget was seen as a kind of failure, because memory preserved not just knowledge, but a sense of belonging. Every rule, every ritual, and every story held the world together. They were passed from mouth to ear, from mother to child, like a fragile flame being carefully guarded through a long, dark winter. And so, as our journey comes to an end, we return to where we began. A world of rules that seem strange to us now, but were, in truth, acts of profound protection. To live back then was to walk a fine line between hunger and hope, between faith and fear. To obey a rule wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of wisdom. It was how you held the chaos at bay. The medieval person didn't think of freedom in the same way we do. For them, freedom lay in knowing their place, their duty, and their prayer, and finding a deep, abiding peace within those borders. When the last bell rang and the final candle was dimmed, they believed the world would keep turning because someone, somewhere, was still following the rule. Perhaps that's why their world still speaks to us centuries later. We hear it in the silent majesty of stone cathedrals. We see it in the worn pages of prayer books, and we feel it in the echoes of stories like this one. Rules may fade, but the human longing behind them, the desire for safety, for order, and for peace, never truly dies. The wind sighs across the fields once more. The stars rise over quiet cottages and sleeping towns. And the medieval world, with all its strange and quiet wisdom, rests again beneath the gentle cover of time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the past. See you next time.